I was standing in my kitchen late one night, close to midnight, fridge door open, light humming, staring at food I didn't really want. Leftovers from earlier, perfectly fine, still edible, but my phone was already in my hand, thumb hovering, thinking about delivery. Not because I was starving, just because I was tired. It had been a long day in that very normal, very unremarkable way. Nothing went wrong. Nothing dramatic happened. I just didn't feel like thinking anymore, and that's the part that stuck with me later. How many money decisions happen right there? Not at a desk, not with numbers pulled up, but in moments when your brain is worn down and convenience feels like mercy. Ordering food, paying extra for faster shipping, saying yes to something because saying no would take more energy than you have. It doesn't feel like spending. It feels like relief. And in the moment, it works. You eat, you sit down, you exhale. But standing there staring into that fridge, I had this faint, uncomfortable sense that a lot of my financial life had been built the same way. One tired decision at a time. No alarms, no warnings. Just small moments where short-term comfort quietly won, and nobody ever told me what it would cost later. For a long time, I thought short-term thinking meant doing something obviously dumb, like blowing a paycheck or buying something flashy you couldn't afford, something you'd immediately regret. But most of the time, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks calm, responsible even. It sounds like it's only a little more, or I'll deal with it later, or this isn't the hill to die on. I used to upgrade things automatically. Slightly better phone plan, slightly nicer option. A few extra dollars because why not? It didn't feel impulsive. It felt adult, practical. And emotionally, everything stayed smooth. No stress, no panic. Just a steady sense that things were under control. Except nothing ever really changed. My situation didn't get worse, but it didn't get lighter either. That's what took me a while to notice. I wasn't failing. I was just hovering. Spending enough to stay comfortable in the moment, but not thinking past that moment. And this is the part I didn't want to look at first. Because there was no villain in the story. No bad habit to point at. Just a long string of reasonable choices that quietly added up and left me wondering why the future always felt slightly out of reach. Food was where it showed up the clearest for me. Lunch here, dinner there, coffee that somehow turned into a sandwich because I was already standing at the counter. $10, $15, $25. It never felt reckless. It felt like solving a problem quickly. I told myself I was buying time. Less cooking, less cleaning, less thinking. And on any given day, that was true. What I didn't see was the pattern. 3 or 4 times a week turns into a couple $100s a month without trying very hard. When I finally did the math, it was close to $400, almost $5,000 a year. That number didn't hit me like a punch. It landed more like a weight, quiet, awkward. Because I didn't remember choosing to spend $5,000 on food I barely remembered eating. I'd chosen tonight, over and over again, and the long-term total just showed up on its own like it had been waiting patiently the whole time. Monthly payments have a way of disappearing into the background. Phone plan, streaming services, apps I signed up for during a free trial and never thought about again. They don't feel like spending because they don't interrupt your day, they just exist. $12 here, $19 there, it's quiet. Predictable, almost comforting. I didn't notice how many of them I had until one night. I scrolled through my bank statement and realized some of these charges had been there for years, not months. Years. I couldn't even remember why I started paying for some of them. And that's when it got uncomfortable. Because none of them were technically wrong. Nothing was maxed out. Nothing was overdue. But all of that money had been committed forward without me ever re-choosing it. It felt like walking into a room you furnished a long time ago and realizing you'd never once asked if you still wanted to live there. Gas was another one I didn't think about much. I'd fill up, feel annoyed for a second, and move on. But then I started noticing how many trips I took just because it was easier than planning. driving a little farther to avoid traffic, making separate errands instead of one trip, convenience routes, quick runs that weren't really necessary. An extra $40 or $50 a month doesn't sound like much, but that's $500 a year, $5,000 over 10 years. And that number didn't feel dramatic. It felt irritating because it wasn't about prices or inflation. It was about habit. Movement feels productive even when it's expensive. And I realized how often I paid for motion instead of intention. Short-term ease, long-term leakage. Quiet, steady, and easy to ignore. Credit cards are especially good at hiding the cost of short-term thinking. The minimum payment looks friendly, manageable. It tells you everything's fine. I used to tell myself I'd pay the balance down soon. Not today. Just not right now. And sometimes I did. Other times, life kept going. A balance of $2,000 doesn't feel like an emergency, but at around 20% interest, that's roughly $400 a year just to keep the balance there. No new purchases, no benefits, just the price of waiting. When I really let that sink in, it felt dull, not scary, just heavy. Like paying rent on a mistake you haven't admitted is a mistake yet. I wasn't reckless, I was postponing. And postponement, it turns out, has a very clear annual cost. I paid a lot of money just to avoid thinking. Faster shipping, premium versions, add-ons that promise fewer clicks, fewer ads, fewer decisions. Individually, they all made sense. Collectively, they started to feel strange. One year, I added up what I'd spent on convenience fees and upgrades that existed purely to reduce friction. It was over $1,000. That number didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel tired, like I'd been slowly trading money for energy without ever checking if the trade was fair. Short-term thinking loves exhaustion. When you're worn down, spending feels like rest. And in the moment, it kind of is. But later, you realize you paid real money to avoid very small discomforts. And the bill doesn't feel as small when it's all sitting in one place. I used to have this invisible rule where anything under $50 didn't really count. I never said it out loud, but I lived by it. $30 here, $45 there. It felt too small to worry about, too petty to track. And because each one was harmless, I never questioned them. Then I did something I'd been avoiding and added them up. If you spend $40 twice a week, that's over $4,000 a year. Seeing that number written down felt uncomfortable in a very specific way. Not panic, not shame, just surprise. Like realizing the drip you ignored for months soaked the floor. I wasn't trying to waste money. I was rounding down my decisions, and the long-term cost of that rounding didn't feel small at all. Saving was easy to delay when nothing felt urgent. Rent was paid. Bills were covered. Life was moving along. I told myself I'd start later, next year, when things felt more stable. But stability has a weird way of convincing you nothing needs attention. I once looked back and realized I'd spent 5 extra years renting simply because I hadn't prioritized saving early. When I estimated the extra rent over that time, it was tens of thousands of dollars. That number didn't make me angry. It made me quiet. Because none of those years felt irresponsible. They felt normal, comfortable, fine. And that's what bothered me. Short-term thinking doesn't feel like a problem while it's happening. It just stretches the timeline of your life without asking. Lifestyle upgrades happen so gradually, I barely noticed them. Slightly better apartment, slightly nicer groceries, a few more comforts layered in. Each one felt earned, reasonable. I told myself this was progress. But when I compared my monthly spending to a few years earlier, I was spending about $600 more every month, over $7,000 a year. That realization didn't feel like regret. It felt like confusion because my life wasn't $7,000 better. It was just more expensive. And the part that sat weird with me was how permanent it all felt. Once you upgrade, going backward feels like failure, even if it would buy you flexibility. Short-term comfort has a way of locking in long-term commitments quietly. Annual fees are easy to forget because they only show up once. Credit card fees, membership renewals, services you signed up for and stopped using months ago. $30, $99. They slide by without much resistance. When I finally added them together, it was over $500 a year. That number wasn't devastating, it was mildly embarrassing, because none of it came from bad decisions. It came from inattention, from being busy, from letting things renew because dealing with them felt annoying. I didn't feel irresponsible, I felt distracted. And distraction, it turns out, is expensive in very quiet ways. Doing nothing with money feels safe. Leaving it in checking, not investing, not planning. It doesn't feel like a decision, it feels like neutrality. But neutrality has a cost. If you skip investing $5,000 a year for 10 years, that's $50,000 you never put to work. With growth, it's closer to $80,000 or $90,000. When I realized that, it didn't scare me. It unsettled me because nothing ever felt wrong during those years. Life was fine. Bills were paid, but time was still passing. Short-term thinking compresses everything into now. And the cost of that shows up later when you realize how much time you let slide by untouched. There are expenses that stick around purely because dealing with them feels irritating. A subscription you meant to cancel. A plan you meant to downgrade. I once ignored something like that for almost 2 years. When I finally fixed it, I realized it had cost me nearly $600. That number didn't hurt. What hurt was how long I let it happen. It wasn't laziness, it was avoidance. Short-term thinking often hides behind that. Not wanting to deal with something now feels harmless, until you realize how long now lasted. I've paid extra just to feel certain, locked-in plans, fixed rates, predictable bills. There's comfort in knowing exactly what's coming, and sometimes that comfort is worth it. But when I compared flexible options to what I was paying, I realized I was spending hundreds more each month just for reassurance. Thousands a year for emotional stability. That insight didn't make me want to cancel everything. It just made me notice the trade. Short-term peace of mind has a long-term price tag, and once you're used to it, it's hard to imagine not paying it. Exhaustion changes how money feels. After a long day, saving feels abstract. Planning feels heavy. I remember skipping a savings transfer because I wanted one good night out. That decision made sense in the moment. I was tired. I wanted relief. That one skip turned into a pattern. Over a year, I missed about $3,000 in savings. The discomfort wasn't about discipline. It was realizing how often fatigue negotiates on behalf of your future. Short-term thinking sounds very reasonable when you're worn down. It uses your own voice. Social spending has a different kind of pressure. Dinners, trips, splitting costs evenly, even when it doesn't quite make sense. I've spent more than I wanted to, just to avoid awkwardness, to keep things smooth. Over time, that added up to thousands of dollars. And the feeling wasn't regret, it was conflict. Because belonging matters. But so does stability. Short-term thinking shows up when you choose present harmony over future ease. And the bill arrives later, quietly, when no one else is around to help pay it. High fixed costs change how you move. Rent, payments, commitments that eat up most of your income before you've made a single choice. I noticed this when I hesitated to take a break or try something new. Not because I was broke, but because I was committed. The discomfort wasn't fear, it was confinement. Short-term thinking often trades flexibility for comfort. And once flexibility is gone, even small risks feel heavy. You earn enough. You function. But your options feel narrower than they should. There's a moment when the pattern becomes obvious. Not through spreadsheets, just through repetition. The same end-of-month feeling, the same explanations, the same lack of progress. I had that moment late one night looking at my account. Nothing dramatic, just clarity. The money came in, it went out. And there was never quite enough left for later. The insight wasn't about budgeting, it was about time. Short-term thinking keeps resetting the clock to today, and tomorrow never really gets funded. I sometimes think about my future self like someone I keep handing small bills to. Nothing outrageous. Just a steady stack of obligations. sorry, I didn't feel like dealing with this earlier. That thought isn't motivating. It's sobering because it's not about guilt. It's about continuity. Every small decision carries a piece of the future with it. Whether I notice or not, short-term thinking doesn't destroy things. It defers them. And deferral always comes due. I picture my finances like a quiet room at the end of a long hallway. Every small decision moves me toward it, even when I'm not thinking about it. The numbers don't shout, they wait. A few dollars here, a missed opportunity there. Over years, they turn into something heavy. I don't always know what to do with that awareness. Some nights, I just sit with it. Let it feel uncomfortable, because pretending it isn't there hasn't helped. And rushing to fix it hasn't either. So I think about it. Late at night, fridge door open, doing the math in my head, letting the weight stay where it is.